Today's daf is daf Chaf Gimel, and we begin with the Mishnah. Ha'isha shenodra min Nazir, after she took her neder for Nazirus, so ha'isa shosa b'yayin mitam, she violated the Easter of Shasiyas Yayin mitam l'meisim, and all this was deliberate harezus ofeges es harboim. Now, there doesn't seem to be any chiddush in this part of the Mishnah, but rather the Mishnah is an introduction to what's going to come later on. And that is, Hefer Labaila. Now, she went ahead and violated her Nazirus. Unbeknown to her, her husband was Mefer HaNazirus. And even though in her mindset she had violated the Isurei Nazirus, she doesn't get Malchus because there was no Neder, there was no Nazirus, the Baal was Mefer. However, Rabbi Yehuda Omer, im Eina Sofeges Sarboim, even if I agree with you that she cannot get Malchus Doraisa, but Tispog, he makas mardus. She should certainly not be getting away with it without any punishment. She should get makas mardus d'Rabbanan, because again, in her mind, to the best of her knowledge, she was deliberately violating the Nazirus, violating the Torah law. She was rebelling against the Ribbon Shalom, and that's called makas mardus. Mardus miloshan rebellion. So that even though we're not talking here about an Isur D'Rabbanan per se, but nevertheless it's like a violation of an Isur D'Rabbanan in the sense that in both cases, this woman who violated her neder, and in the case of someone who violates an Isur D'Rabbanan, he is a mored, and therefore he deserves mardus, makas mardus. Now, Makas Mardus is a little bit less severe than Malchus Doraisa. And, one wonders here if Rabbi Yehuda is working in favor of this woman or against this woman. Maybe by imposing Makas Mardus, he is sort of alleviating her punishable violation. Tana Rabbana, we learned in a Brisa. This is a brisa which Rashi quotes in his Pirush al Torah in Parshas Matos. The Torah says that im yafer osam isha biyom shomo, etc., etc. Isha haferam v'Hashem yisach lo. So the Torah says that the husband was mefer the neder of his wife, and yet Hashem yislach lo, which requires slicha kapara. And the answer is Be'isha shehefer labayla v'hilo yada'a hakosem edavishi tzricha kapara slicha. So she needs to do tshuva in order to achieve kapara and slicha, because even though before she did not violate any iser, but she nevertheless did an action which, according to her own understanding, was a violation of the Torah law, and for that she needs kapara. Now, I'm not sure, does she need kapara for the machshava, or does she need kapara for the maisa? And I'll tell you what bothers me. We have a principle, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu mitzaref machshava l'maisa. And a person may have schemed and in his mind designed to implement an aver, but if he never did so, he's not punishable. Here, on the other hand, the person actually implemented the maisa before. And although that Maisa, strictly speaking, is not an Avera, but in the Machshava, it's a Maisa. So I think what's happening here is that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is being Mitzaref Machshava to Maisa because she did a Maisa before. Ukshahayim Agir Rabbi Akiva Etzel Pasuk Zeh, when Rabbi Akiva understood this limud from the Pasuk, Chayabochi would cry. Now, in the footnote here, he brings the Arizal, who says that Rabbi Akiva was actually a, so to speak, a reincarnation of the neshama of Shimon, the Shevet, the son of Yaakov. And Shimon was the one who actually pushed Yosef into the bar. And Rabbi Akiva knew this. And he was not so upset about it because he figured that Shimon was really doing a good thing, although again in Shimon's machshava he was doing a wrong thing. But Hashem, as the pasuk says, Hashem chashva letova lahachios amrav, that the sale of Yosef was a good thing for the Jewish people, and therefore Rabbi Akiva, as the incarnation of the soul of Shimon, was absolutely comfortable, and he didn't feel any nervous tension about it. But now that he found out that even if a person did something which is not strictly speaking an avera, because, as we said before, in the case of Yosef into the bar, which is the beginning of the process of Yosef coming down to Mitzrayim, it was Hashem chashva l'tova. But now he'd find out that it's not enough that Hashem chashva l'Torah. What was your intention? And Shimon was deliberate in his intention. And therefore, Rabbi Akiva realized that he was guilty, or Shimon, his ancestor, was guilty, and Adam nitfas al machshava ra. And Rabbi Akiva darshan the following kal v'chomer: Uma im niskavin lalos biyodo b'sar chazir v'ola biyodo b'sar tleh. A person intended to violate an isur of macholas asuros, and it turned out, as luck would have it, it was kosher food. But his intention was deliberate to violate the Torah law. And already, for that intention to violate the Torah law, which expresses itself in a ma'aseh of achila, he will be punished, and therefore he needs slicha kapara. Is amaskavi lalos biyodo b'sar chazir v'yola biyodo b'sar chazir alachas kama v'kama. Meaning, can we imagine what would be the nature of punishments for a person who not only had the deliberate violation intention, but also was motzi lepoal, and he actually violated that isur? How much is the severity of such a punishment in comparison to someone who at the end of the day he ate kosher food? And if in the case where he had the machshava ra, even though the ma'isa was a ma'isa of achilas dvarim amutarim, he still needs kapara. How much more so someone who was motzi lepoal, he actualized his intention, and he violated the Torah law as he had intended to do so. So you need kapara on machshava and on ma'isa. So the Achronim raised the following objection. We know there's a parsha called Shogeg. So why does Rabbi Akiva have to derive from this kal v'chomer of miskaven, lechol, basar, chazir, etc.? Why not just derive from the fact that a shogeg is punished? He has to bring a carbon. In a case of a rotzeh, a shogeg, he goes into the miklad. You see, the Torah holds a person responsible for a shgaga. So how much more so amazing? And that itself should have given Rabbi Akiva the reason to be bocher. But the answer is offered here by the Ben Ish Chai, that here we're talking about a case where, because he was in a sakana, he's permitted to eat basar isur. However, at that moment, he had a taiva to eat the basar chazir. He was allowed to do so because it was a pikuach nefesh situation, but he had in mind the taiva of eating basar chazir. He got lucky, and also biyado, Besar tle. Just 1 second. Let me read it once more. Be'ofen shemachma sakana mutar lo lechol basar isur ve'osa shanis ava lebasar chazir uposhat yodo ve'olsa biyodo chaticha hasur v'yochla. I don't know how he's fitting this into the Gemara's language. The Gemara says also biyodo b'sar tle. In other words, Rabbi Akiva is saying the following, that if in the case of his kavin lechol basar chazir also be other basar tle, he needs kapara just for the machshava. How much more so in a case of a person who, although he's permitted to eat the basar chazir because of sakana, he had a taiva le'iser, and he enjoyed the benefit of a basar chazir. We find in the parasha of Karman Osham Habala Safek, and the Torah there Vayikra Hey says V'im Nefesh Ki Sechta etc. V'lo Yoda V'Oshem V'Nosav Vono. So he's not sure whether or not he violated an Isur. He needs kapar, and he brings a Karman Osham Tolu. Uma mishan is coming lalos biyoda b'sar tlevi ol biyoda b'sar chazir. So here's a case where it could be, we don't know, it's a suffix that he violated the achila basar chazir. Kigon chaticha suffix shel shuman suffix shel chelev. So he thought that he was eating shuman, but we're really not sure because we find out that it might be chelev. And Omer Kra, the Torah says that even in this case of a suffix, where his intention was not to violate the Torah, nevertheless, the pasuk says, Omer Kra v'nasa vono. He needs kapar, he has to bring a korban osham tolu. So his kavanah was to eat a davar mutar, and instead he came up with something which is a suffix. Is therefore mishan is coming lalos biyoda b'sar chazir, v'yola biyoda b'sar chazir alachas kam v'kama. How much more so do you need kapara if your intention and your ma'isa were both to violate the Torah? Isi ben Yehudomer. He has a different Kal V'chomer. V'lo yada v'oshem v'nasa vono. Again, it's the same pasuk in the parasha of Osham Tolu. Uma mishin is coming laos biyoda b'sar tlevel biyoda b'sar chazir. Again, suffix chazir. Ukigon shtei chatichos. So again, this is not the case where you're not sure whether he ate shuman or chelev, but rather there are two chatichos, achas shel chelev, achas shel shuman. So it's definitely chelev here. His kavanah was to eat the shuman, but now maybe he ate the chelev. And the Torah says, v'nos avono is how much more so miskaven, lalos biyodo b'sar chazir, v'yolo biyodo b'sar chazir, lachas kam v'kam. V'al zeh, yidvu hadovin. So the word yidvu means yitztaru, that a person should realize the chomer adin, that even if he didn't have kavanah to do an avera, and we're not even sure that he did the avera, nevertheless there's an asiyas amon here. He should have been more careful. So Gemara immediately asks, hani lamali, why do we need in this price of 3 different kal v'chomers? And the Gemara asks, tzrichin, we need all 3. If we would only had the Kal V'chomer from the case of a woman whose husband was made for Nedarim and she didn't realize that and she violated the Neder. She certainly had kavana for the Maaseh Isur. She didn't know that her husband was made for Nedarim. She had full, deliberate intention to violate the Isur Nazirus. But I might think, Aval, Chaticha, Safik, Shalchelev, Safik, we don't know the nature of this Chaticha. And the Le'ateri Chaven, his kavanah was to eat Shuman, which is Davar Heter, not to eat Chelev. Is Lo Boi Kapar Slicha. I might think that there's no need for Kapar in that case, because there was never an intention to violate the Isur. And therefore, we have that second Kal V'chomer to teach me that even in this case, there is still a necessity for kapar. V'yitmar hada, and if we had this last Kal V'chomer from a case where it's a suffix chelev suffix shuman and it needs kapara, that's only in that case the ika isura, meaning there's a very very strong 50% possibility that he violated the isur v'achilas chelev. Aval isha dehefer labayla dehetera, we know for sure without a shadow of a doubt that she was not in violation of the neder because the Baal was made for the neder. Loti boy, I might think she doesn't need kapar slicha. V'yitmar b'hani tarti, if we had these two psukim, hava min, I would have said hani tarti hu desagi laho b'kapar slicha. In these cases, there's enough of a reason to alleviate the severity of the violation and allow for kapar and slicha. Why? Because first of all, in the case of Safek, and he or she brings a korban asham there, we're not even sure that he violated the Isur and he ate chelev. And secondly, in the case of Nazir, she certainly didn't violate the Isur Nazirus. And that's called lo ikva isura. Aval b'shtei chatichas hashel chevach shel shuma de ikva isura lo sagile b'kapar slicha. But if we know that in this mixture there's not only a piece of shuma, but there's also a piece of chelev, that's called ikva isura. The isur is kavua lefanav. He knows that there's a chaticha surah here. He knows that there's chelev here. And in such a case, maybe the Torah would say he doesn't get off the hook. And maybe a korban would not be enough to achieve kapara. Kamash malan. That's what the Bryce wants to teach us, the lo shna. So it comes out like this. You know, each Kal V'chomer comes to be machmir on the one before, meaning that, let's say, for example, there's a possibility that he actually ate chelev, whereas in the case of Nazir, she definitely did not violate the Isur, and the Kamash Malin is that no, even in that case, she needs kapara. But the last Kal V'chomer is Lakula. He's telling you that, yes, there is kapara for someone in the case of Ikba Isura. I didn't see anyone point this out. Now, there's another sugya in Krisus that's relevant to this, because Rabbi Yehuda in Krisus is of the opinion that if there's only one chaticha, we don't know whether or not it was the chaticha that he ate was shuman or chelev. He's not chayav and Hashem told. Our Gemara is not going according to Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, now we begin an agadata that'll take us for the balance of today's daf. Omar Rabba Bar Bachanam Rabbi Yochanan. My dechsiv, a pasuk in Hosea Novi, ki yesharim darki Hashem v'tzadikim yelchu bam, uposhem yikashlu bam. And the implication is that both the tzaddik and the poshea are going down the same road. And yet one is yelchu bam and the other is yikashlu bam. So what does this mean? How could it be possible they're both going down the same road, and for the tzaddik it's a good thing, and for the posheh it's a bad thing? And we'll answer this as Rabbi with a mashal. Both would barbecue their Pesach. Echad achol shum mitzvah, ve'echad achol shum achila gasa. Zeh shachol shum mitzvah tzadikim yelchu bam. V'zeh shachol shum achila gasa uposhim yikoshlu bam. Now this is very strange here. It says that echad achol l'shum achila gasa shelo ayora ev v'lo hois achilosol l'teyomon. How could this be? The Gemara says that Korban Pesach has to be nechal ala sova. So how can you call him a poshea? So there are a number of answers to this question. I'm going to just mention the Meiri's answer. He says, Masha Pesach nechal ala sova eina pirisha ochel zos achar shu savea. It doesn't mean that you should eat the Korban Pesach after you're fully satiated because zu achila gasahi, but rather kavana lachila shetashlim esviyoso. In other words, he's almost at the point of svia. He hasn't passed that point. When he eats the Korban Pesach, he'll be totally savea. Whereas this fellow is totally savea, and he's just eating it l'teyomon. Now we have Reish Lakish. Reish Lakish disagrees with Rabbi Yochanan in interpreting, in Rabbah, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, interpreting the pasuk in Hosea. Hi, Rasha Karisle. Okay, Yeden Achila Gas. Is that called a Rasha? And therefore will apply the pasuk of Poshim Yikashlu Bam. The Hidlo Kavid Mitzvah Muvchar. Okay, the Mitzvah Muvchar is to eat b'teyomon. He was already. The Mitzvah Muvchar is to eat ala sova, and he was beyond that. Is Pesach miyaka'avid, but he did fulfill the mitzvah achilas Pesach. How can you call him a posheh? So the Rishonim don't understand this objection of Reish Lakish. We have a principle called achila gasa ein shmei achila. And here the Gemara says, in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, that achila l'shum achila gasa. So Tosas answers this question by saying that a person who's savea is not necessarily eating an achila gasa. Achila gasa is beyond that. It's what's called nafsho kotza b'achila. I mean, he can hardly tolerate taking the food down. But the Rosh is not happy with Tosas because he says that Poshim Yikoshlu Bam is not talking about a case of nafsho kotza. Poshim Yikoshlu Bam sounds like he's really enjoying the Korban Pesach. So the Marsha says the following: Mashmos hakosavi sheba oso maisa sadikim yelchu bo Poshim Yikoshlu. V'ha'ochel k'shenafsho kotza Eino nikra ochel mazik, v'yafat tzadik eino makayba ze mitzvah. Ella, so now Reish Lakish has to find an alternative interpretation of the pasuk. Mashal l'shnei b'yom zeish tov zachoso imo. So there was a confusion here about the two women, and two men had relationships with these two women. Ze ish tov achoso imo. Lazen is damlo ishto, lazen is damlo achoso. So he's in a dark room with his wife and his sister. What does it mean, ishto vachoso? Is ze ishto vachoso imo, vize ishto vachoso imo. So each one had his wife and his sister, but one of them had relations with his wife, and the other one had a relation with his own sister, which is an Isakaris. Zeshet is damlo ishto tzadikim yelchu bam. Zeshet is damlo achoso uposhem yikoshlu bam. So he says here in the footnote, again quoting the Maharsha, that the pasuk in Mishlei says lo yeuna l'tzadik al ovan. So how could it be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, for someone who's guiltless, was mizameh lo his own sister? So he says Hasheni niskamin la'arshia v'zimeh lo es achoso. Yesh mevarim sha'af shu shogeg nikar poshea ki vadai choto mikodem ez a chet adoma lezeh b'meisid v'lachein nichshal b'shogeg b'yisur chamu. In other words, it must be in the hashgacha of Hashem, divine providence, that he had in the past violated a severe Isur b'meisid, and now HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him a kishalon b'shogeg of an Isur that's even more severe. This reminds us of Shemin al Yado, with the ladder. So the Gemara asks me, Dami, Anan Kamrin and Chado Derech. So we're looking for a pshat in the pasuk where they're both going on the same derech, they're doing the same ma'isa. Halcha shnei drachim. Here, this one had a relationship with his wife, and the other one with his sister. Ela moshel lilot ushtei b'nosov ima. Hein sheniskam l'shem mitzvah tzadikim yelchu b'am. Who, meaning Lot, sheniskam l'shem avera, who poshem yikoshlu b'am. So there was one Maisa Bia between Lot and his first daughter, and then the next night Lot and his second daughter. And they wanted to be Makayim the Olam, to be Mamid Doros. That's called Tzadikim Yelchubam. We'll see what their reward was. Whereas Lot, his kavanah was the Shem Avera. So Gemara asks, V'dilma hu nami l'shum mitzvah chavit. How do you know for sure that Lot was not interested in propagating the world, but rather just for the pleasure of having this relationship? And the Gemara is going to answer based on a drasha of Rabbi Yochanan. When Lot separates himself from Avram Avinu, the pasuk says, "Vayisa Lot es Einov, vayares kol kikar hayarden kikula mashke." On Rabbi Yochanan, kol pasuk azel shem averanim. Every single word in this pasuk is a remez to explain why Lot chose stone, because stone was shotuf bezima. For example, it says Vayisa Lot, and how do we know the Vayisa is a lashon of zima? Shenema, because it says Vatisa Eshes Adonam Esenel. So this is Eshes Potifar, and Vatisa, she wanted to have znus with Yosef. And then the pasuk says Es Enov. That's also an Esias Einayim Lavera, as it says in the pasuk in Shoftim with regard to Shimshon. There was a debate, an argument between Shimshon and his father, because Shimshon wanted to marry a certain Knanis. Mibnos Plishtim, to be more precise. And Shimshon's parents tried to talk him out of it. And his response was, Vayomolo ovi v'imo ha'en bibnos achecha u'b'chol ami isha. This is what they said to him. Is there a no woman amongst the daughters of your brothers, meaning of Israel? Isha kiato lech lekachas isha miplishtim harelim. But the answer is, Vayomer Shimshon el Aviv Osa Kachli. I want to marry her ki he Yeshara B'Einai. What does that mean, Yeshar B'Einai? What was so Yeshar B'Einai? But rather he had a taiva for her. So we see that B'Einai Esainav is also Lashon taiva. And I think if we could add here that on the pasuk also su achrei levavka achrei einechem zu snus. Then the pasuk says vayar, and Lot beheld the kikar Yarden. Vayar oso Shechem ben Chamor. Right? Shechem sees Dinah, and he has a taiva for Dinah. As called Kikar Yarden is also a remez to sexual immorality, because the word Kikar is written by Znus. In the pasuk in Mishlei, Ki biad isha zona ad Kikar lechem. A person will sell the last loaf of bread that he owns in order to have Znus with an isha zona. So we see the word Kikar in the context of Znus. Kikula mashke, this is also a remez for Znus. As it says in the Pasuk in Hosea, Elcha acharei ma'avai, nosne lachmi, umemi tsamri, ufishti shamni, vishikuyoi. So we'll emphasize the word vishikuyoi. Shikuyoi is miloshe mashke. And here also we see that the pasuk is talking about a passionate love and mashke. So Lot also was only interested in Avera. And therefore, if he had a relationship with his daughters, then we're not going to be danim l'kav schus. But on the contrary, we're going to assume that for sure he had kavana l'shem Avera. Now, he quotes a Birchas HaRosh here in the footnote that there are chamisha in Yonei Isur Shahoya Eitzel Lot. Number one, L'Shem Noi, and that we learned from Eshes Potifar. She was so impressed by the beauty of Yosef, so taken by and allured by it. L'Shem Maila, person like builds himself up. And it says Yeshar B'Einai, right? The Kilu Shimshon says, oh, she's a good woman, and she's a balas midos or something like that, balas milos. L'shem hisparus, a person has this relationship because he wants to show off. Like, for example, Shechem ben Chamor is interested in showing and projecting the fact that he had a relationship with the daughter of Yaakov. L'shem Zima, as it says, Kikar, is a remez for the person who will give up his last piece of bread for Zima, and l'shem Mamon el chachrei ma'ovai nosnei lachem. In fact, the Gemara, how can you tell me that Lot had kavana for rishus for hamenus honest? He was drunk, and if he was drunk, he didn't have his mind about him. How can you tell me that I kavana l'shem avera? And the Gemara answers, Tana Mishum of Yossi, Berebi Chanina, Choni, that in the case of Bnos Lot, it says in the Pasuk, Yoda b'shichva uvekuma. And the word bekuma, lama nakud alvav ubekuma shel bechira. So we're talking about the first night with the older daughter, and it says ubekuma. And there's a nakuda on the vav, on top of the vav nakuma, which indicates that it's as if you take out the vav. And if you take out the vav, then you read it as bikuma. Again, it's a little bit more complicated than I'm making it out to be here about the Nakuda here. He says here in the name of Tosus that the Nakuda is Okeres Hamila. It takes out the word. The Marsha says, so why does it say Ubakuma if you're just taking out the word? So the Taz explains, Shebevadai Bekumo, when he woke up, Ra, he saw what had happened, V'yoda, and he knew that she was with him. Again, he may not have known about the Maisa Bia, but he knew that she was close to him, that they had some sort of an intimacy. So if you take out the vav of ubekuma because of the nakuda, uki'ilu kasuv ubekama below vav. So as if to say, that if I understand this correctly, that lo yada b'shichva, he didn't know about the Masechet, but ubekuma, when he awoke from his state of intoxication, then he did know. And that's what the Gemara says, b'shichva lo yada, but bekuma yada. He knew about bekuma, which means as if they had some sort of intimacy, some sort of close relation. So the Gemara asks, okay, he found out about it when morning broke. So what could he do? The Maisa was already done. Why is he guilty? Why are we saying U'Rishoyim Yikoshlu Bam? U'Poshim Yikoshlu Bam. So our answer is Nafkamina de Lepanya Chrina Lo Yiboyle Mishtei Chamra. He should have realized that as a result of his drunkenness, this is what brought about this to happen. He got drunk a second night, apparently hoping that it would happen again, and it did with his younger daughter. Dorish Rava, Maidich Siv, Pasuk in Mishlei, Ach Nifsha Mikiryas Oz. There's a brother who is a Poshea, and he rebels against his brother, and he forfeits an Ir Chazaka, a strong city, as a result. So Rashi, not here but elsewhere, explains that Nifsha is Miloshan merit, and it's a reference to Lot, who rebelled against Avraham Avinu when he was Poresh and Misrachek Mimenu.